So after last night's blessing of the land, did your mind feel different? Yeah. So I think that is a really good way of seeing that our experience depends upon what we think and what goes on in our mind. You know? And because you do some kind of ritual like that, and the purpose of rituals isn't just to do the ritual, it's to transform our mind. And when you are focused and your mind's transformed, then you feel differently afterwards. Yeah. So I know when I do the King of Prayers, I often feel like I go into another dimension of pure lands and Buddhas and Bodhisattvas everywhere. And then I come back here at the end, and it all seems very different. Yeah, because you take some of the uplifted feeling and the feeling of the presence of the holy beings with us when we come back here, you know. So, and this is the purpose, you know, when we do meditation on Chenrezig or the Buddha or any of our sadhanas, is to expand the mind and help us think in a different way, to pull us out of this solid, very limited way of thinking that we so often have. So whether we do it, you know, we do it by several ways, the Lamrim meditation being one, and the different sadhanas and so on being another, and there's even more than that. But, you know, the idea is to really see that our ordinary way of thinking is not perceiving reality and is really very limited and shallow and not to be trusted. Yeah. So, I mean, we trust it in one way or another. You know a banana is a banana and it's healthy to eat. But, you know, the kind of opinions and likes and dislikes and, you know, stubborn preferences when our mind gets quite stubborn, you know, anger, attachment, these things, to really see that these things are not in line with the actual reality of what the world is. And when we can see that and drop these false views and the afflictions that they generate, then our whole mind is transformed. So one of the purposes of taking monastic ordination is to give us the kind of lifestyle that is conducive to doing this kind of work on our mind. You know, it's hard to do this kind of work when you're completely immersed in a regular life. You know, if you're an extremely good practitioner, yes. You know, if you're somebody like me, you need a special environment, because in the regular environment, you know, I'm just whoosh and whoosh and whoosh and whoosh, and, you know, whatever object you contact, then you know, our mind is so reactive to whatever object we perceive, and so entrenched in reaction to sense objects. Yeah, and so depending on what we perceive, we have one mood, we have another mood, we have one thought, we have another thought. Our mind is completely all over the place. And so by limiting some of the things that we engage in, it helps us to begin to control the mind and gives us more space to just observe what the mind is involved in and how it's reacting and how it's thinking. Yeah, and that's so important, because otherwise, like I said, you know, just the past conditioning just pushes us here, there, everywhere. Okay, I mean, the brain scientists, I left that article downstairs, they just say, well, you know, you have more ruts in certain neurons, and you know, so of course your thoughts go in that direction. If you need to develop, you know, passageways in other neurons to get them to connect so that you have different thoughts and different feelings. So it's probably, a combination of both working on our mind and our brain. But I think if we work on our mind, it changes the brain. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do. Yeah. So here in this sutra that we were going over, the Buddha's giving us some instructions about how to relate to lay society as monastics in order to be able to not get so caught up in things that make our mind spin out of control. Okay? We've all lived in lay society. That's all of us have grown up in lay society. So we all are very familiar with it. Is your mind well managed in regular, ordinary daily life? When you're in the city and you get up in the morning and you have your coffee and turn on the radio and then get in your car and again turn on the radio and arrive at work and listen to your colleagues talk about the news and the soap operas, and then plan with your colleagues about, what bar you're going to go to after work to relax, or, what other activities you're going to do with your colleagues to relax, and then listening to your spouse tell you about what's happening with your kids, and listening to your kids, different things. They fought with this one, they like this teacher, they don't like that teacher. You come home from work and your spouse also wants to talk about what they went through at work all day, so they kind of, unload on you for a while, and then you're exhausted, and so you get out the half-gallon of ice cream and start self-medicating and turn on the television and, or maybe you go jogging and get some exercise and, come home and, and do whatever you do in the evening. And in that lifestyle, which we're also familiar with, are we aware of what's going on in our mind enough to even start to discern what is virtue and what isn't? Are we even aware enough to discern, what is a realistic thought and what isn't? What is a beneficial thought and what isn't? When we're living that kind of lifestyle where things are coming at us one after the other after the other. Yeah? And where nothing in the environment is encouraging us to stop and think. Yeah. Now you might say, well, I've been at the Abbey and there's a lot going on here, and you have one thing coming at you, one after the other after the other. Yeah. But there's a difference, because you have at least 2 meditation periods where you sit. Yeah. You have some study period where you step back and you study and look at your mind. You have the whole community ambience and daily structure, which is structured in a way to help us look at our mind and cut down how much we're dragged into unnecessarily objects and topics of conversation that really aren't important for us. Okay, so the whole environment here is structured for that purpose. Yeah, so that's why we have guidelines or rules to follow, not only our monastic precepts, but also the guidelines and rules of the community where we live, because everything is specifically structured for a particular goal. Yeah, the rules aren't just so that somebody can be on high and tell everybody else what to do. That's not the purpose. You can do that in lay society. You don't need to come to a monastery. Yeah, but rather, all these things are established with the thought of training the mind. And so the whole way a monastic community runs is with the thought of how do we train our mind. Yeah. So some people comment, well, there's a hierarchy in monastic life. Yeah. And we're Americans and we like democracy and equality. Okay? Now, if you have a community where there's some people who have spent more time training their mind than other people who haven't spent more time training their mind, and you make everything equal, then what is the, in terms of everything's equal in terms of deciding the schedule and the way the community works, then what kind of ambience are you going to have? Because the people who have trained their mind and who haven't trained their mind are equally deciding everything. From what to study to what the rules of the monastery are, to the way precepts are kept. So what's going to happen if everybody's on an equal ground? Yeah. What would happen in a company if, the CEO who, has the whole big vision of the company and knowledge of, the finances and all the clients and all the different things, and if they were equally directing the direction of the company with somebody who's just been working, as on a low level of the company for a few months. What's going to happen if they have equal, balance in terms of deciding the direction of the company? Yeah. What are you getting what I'm saying? Yeah. So I've had a lot of experience in community, and one of the first monasteries I lived in was Dorje Pommel Monastery in France, and those of us, the seniors who lived there, we were maybe ordained 6, 7, 8 years longer than the new people who came in. And nobody really knew anything much about monastic life. And so we tried to make everything as equal as we could. And what would happen is every time a new person entered the community, we had to redo the schedule. Because every person who comes in doesn't like the daily schedule. They want it to change. So, they want something 5 minutes later or this way or that way. So then, as soon as somebody new came, because we were trying to be equal, we all had to spend a lot of time going and analyzing the daily schedule again and again. Yeah? And we, everybody who came in, whatever their opinions were on the direction and how to do things, we really, all sat around and talked about those and so on and so forth. And it wound up to be quite a mess, actually, because we would decide something and try and make it something that was pleasing to the new person who came in the community. And then another new person would come in, so we tried to change things to make things pleasing to that person. Meanwhile, the first new person who came in decided that they were going to leave. So although we had changed things to be the way they liked, now they left the community and everybody else is doing things the way that person liked, even though they didn't agree with it so much because they were trying to make the new people happy. Yeah, so it really, there was a lot of time spent, I think, in conversations that the time could have been used more studying the Dharma and, meditation practice or so on. And then also we wound up making decisions that weren't necessarily wise, because the people who were freshly ordained were making some of the long-term policies, and they don't know the Vinaya, they haven't trained their mind, they haven't lived as monastics, they don't know what the whole thing's about, and so everything is getting structured based on their worldly preferences. And the people who have been involved in training their mind for a while are then having to do things like that. So I learned a lot from that experience. I learned a whole lot from that experience. Yeah? And, and it's whichever end you're on, whether you're on the side of the seniors or the side of the juniors who are just entering, both positions are very difficult. Yeah? When you're a junior, you think the seniors have so much power and they're just making decisions and not listening to you. When you're a senior, you try and help the juniors and you feel like they just have their own way of thinking and don't want to hear anything. So when there's this thing of everybody holding on to their thing of, I'm a senior, you should listen to me, or I'm a junior, you should do what pleases me and help me, then as soon as anybody holds on to what their role is and doesn't have any compassion for the people in the other role, then things get very difficult in the community. Yeah? Because then everybody starts accusing everybody, these ones are all fuddy-duddies, they're so old-fashioned traditionalists, they don't know about Facebook and tweeting, and, they're closed-minded, and these young'uns, they're not very far from their sex and intoxicant days, and, they just don't want to hear anything, they think the world's all theirs, and, and then, it sounds like a generation gap in a family, and who wants that? Okay. When I went to Taiwan to take, to receive Bhikshuni ordination, there were about 500 people there, okay, taking Bhikshuni ordination. There were 2 of us Westerners. And with 500 people, getting everybody in the same place at the same time, it takes some coordinating. With a small group, we all come to the front door, leave our shoes, and come in. Could you imagine 500 people coming to the front door and leaving their shoes and coming in, and then going out and finding their shoes again? Just think of what that would be like. How long would that take? Yeah? So they have very particular ways in the Chinese, monasteries of lining people up. So outside, you're in teams of 10 people, and you line up in different places outside with your team, and you stand perfectly still with your eyes down. And then when it is your team's time to enter, then you go in, there's a specific place you leave your shoes, all in a row, so that everybody's shoes are exactly one right after the other, so that when you come out, your team knows exactly where their shoes are, because they're always in the same place, and everybody is standing in the same order, and their shoes are in the same order. So it's very easy to find everything. But still, it takes some time for everybody to file in from outside, inside, and so on, okay? So we did some of our practices inside the main hall, and then the teachings were in the dining room. And so to go into the dining room, we all had to first gather in the main hall first, and then file from the main hall into the dining room. Yeah, so that meant you first lined up outside the main hall, you filed into the main hall, so everybody was in their place, and then you filed immediately out of the main hall into the dining room, because they had it all set up on how to file from one place to another like this. They did not have it set up on how to file from outside directly into the dining room. Okay, so it took some time to do this. Well, I'm an American, and Americans like things to be quick, and we like things to be efficient. And I had a way in my mind of how they could organize it so that everybody didn't have to go into the meditation hall first and could just file directly into the dining room. And it would have saved so much time, so much energy, my brilliant idea, and nobody wanted to listen to it. Can you imagine this? Yeah? These wise monks and nuns who are a generation older than me did not want to listen to my brilliant idea. Just, what hope is there for the monastic institution? If they don't listen to my brilliant idea, what hope is there? So it was actually a very good experience for me. Yeah? Because here was my brilliant idea and nobody wanted to listen to it. And they kept reminding us, all 500 of us, that you came here to train your mind. Yeah, you came here to learn how things are done in the monastery. And you're learning from people who have been practicing a while, who went through the same difficulties of training that you're going through right now. Because it's not like all the monks and nuns who were organizing this very impractical way of filing, from one place to the other, came in as skilled practitioners. They had all at one time or another come in as new people too. So they knew what it was like. Yeah. And they trained their mind, and then they were having to deal with us. Yeah. And they were very, very strict with us. Incredibly strict with us. And everything was in Mandarin or Taiwanese. There was no English translation because there was only 2 of us. So for 1 month, the whole program, for the first 2 weeks, there was absolutely nothing in English except in our in break time when we went back to our dorm room. Then our team leader knew a little bit of English, so she tried to tell us what was going on. And we requested an English translation, but it took 2 weeks for the master to grant it. And even then, we couldn't have it during the training sessions. We only had it during the teaching sessions, when we sat back and the translator did the best as she could to translate. Yeah, but there were all these different people from different temples, different ages, different backgrounds, all coming together. And it was quite something. And I remember one day, if you broke, one of the rules, for example, if you left during the training program, if you left the premises during the training program, or if there were only certain days where visitors were allowed, and if you met visitors on other days besides those that, that were visiting days, all these kinds of rules, If you got caught, you had to kneel in the very front of the meditation hall, in front of all 500 people, and kneel and hold a stick of incense for as long as it took for that stick of incense to burn down. Yeah, in that uncomfortable position with everybody else knowing that you did something wrong. Huh? Yes, on the marble floor without any cushions under your knees. Okay? And one time, there was one nun. I was really shocked by this. She was called up to the front, and they slapped her face. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm a baby boomer. We don't slap people. That's illegal in my generation. And I was like, what are they slapping her for? And then somebody told me afterwards she criticized her master. Yeah, and so they really had to, out of compassion say, look, if you are really serious about training, you're not going to be able to learn anything if you disrespect your teacher. Yeah, if you think you know more than your teacher, you're not going to, how can you learn anything? Because you already know it in your own mind, of course, So I'm not advocating that, but I'm just saying that's what they did, and it really surprised me quite a bit. And of course, I couldn't protest. I couldn't go up and say, I am an American, and, beating people, we got rid of that in our school system a long time ago, aside from the fact that I once took a kid to the principal because he was driving me crazy and that got him swatted. But we won't talk about that. We can't do that. And why are you humiliating these people in front of everybody else? We don't do that. That's horrible. Don't you know that when you do that to children, it causes, irreparable damage to their psyche and self-esteem, and, I couldn't go to the people who were training me and say that. Anyway, they didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Chinese. And anyway, were they going to change? No. Why should they change? Yeah? Why should they change? There are certain times in monasteries, and you always have it, you try and open things up to get everybody's ideas as much as possible, but then the people who have more experience are the ones who make the decisions. Okay? So why should they change? Maybe because the culture has changed. Maybe because, slapping people worked generations ago, but it doesn't work on our generation. Yeah? So that might be a good reason to change. On the other hand, making people kneel in front of the group in a Western culture, that may not work, but in an Asian culture, it works very well. Would you say so? Yeah, it works. Yeah, you get embarrassed. You don't like it. You feel awful, so you don't do that action again. Yeah, it's not, but the way I think Asians feel awful and the way Westerners feel awful is different. I do. Westerners say, I'm a horrible person, I'm a terrible person. Asians say, I let somebody else down. I care about that other person and I let them down. So you see, there's two very different ways of reacting to that. So for one culture it may work, for another culture it may not work. Yeah? So there are, times to change things, of course. I mean, look, what happened to the Catholic Church, they certainly need to change. Yeah? And they still do. Yeah, and it's very interesting if you compare me to like the tradition, the regular, my teachers, put it this way, if you compare me to my teachers, I am like way over on the left radical liberal side. Yeah. If you compare me to the typical Western lay Dharma teacher, I am over on the right side, conservative. You know? So I'm both a liberal and a conservative regarding monasticism. Okay. But, you know, what I'm getting at here is that things are structured in a monastery in a certain way for a certain purpose, you know, and that structure has been found to be beneficial by people who have trained their minds using that structure. That doesn't mean nothing can change, because times are always changing. You know, when I trained, there was not computers, you know. I mean, in the Buddha's time, there weren't computers. There are no precepts governing the use of computers. I think there need to be precepts in the Pratimoksha governing the use of computers nowadays. Yeah. In fact, Thich Nhat Hanh rewrote the Bhikshu Pratimoksha and took out what he considered to be precepts that didn't apply and put in new ones about driving and about who drives in a car with who and about how you use online media and who uses computers and when and who else has to be in the room. And there's all sorts of other things. Okay? So on one hand, somebody may say, oh, that's good. They're very, very practical. They updated it according to computers. And then somebody else may walk in and say, but I can't use my computer when I want to. They're telling me I can't just go online when I want to, and I can't look at everything that I want to look at online, and I can't use it as much as I want to. There has to be another person in the room, and I can only be on for so much time, and I can only do this with my computer and that with my computer. Oh, they're so conservative. You know, it's really interesting, isn't it? You know, depending upon which way you enter and which way you look at something, you know, you could say, oh, how fantastic. They've updated the precepts to include modern things. But then you see what it includes and you decide you don't like it because it restricts your freedom. And I want freedom. Okay, what do we want? Freedom. What kind of freedom do we want? Do we want freedom to say and do whatever we want? Or do we want to be free from ignorance, anger, and attachment? This is the question that we all have to ask ourselves. You know, we all want freedom. Do I want freedom to express my attachment, anger, aversion, pride, jealousy everywhere, anytime, to whomever I want without any consequences? Is that the freedom I want? Or do I want to be free from ignorance, anger, attachment, pride, jealousy? Okay? Because to get the internal freedom, we have to restrict the external freedom at the beginning, and for a good ways in the process. Okay? If there was no need for restricting the external freedom, there would have been no reason for the Buddha to leave his family. He would have stayed there with his wife and the dancing girls and his kids and ruled the kingdom, you know, ran a software business, sold artwork. He would have done everything. He wouldn't have left all of that and limited his environment. And even after he attained full awakening, did he then attain awakening and go right back into the world and live as he had lived before? No. He remained a monk. You know, and his monastic way of lifestyle was the external expression of a mind that was really subdued. He could have attained, used monasticism, attained, as a vehicle to attain enlightenment, and then gone back to the kingdom and said, okay, Dad, I'm ready to rule the kingdom. I'm a Buddha now. I'll run the whole policy and make everybody ordain and meditate certain hours a day in school and but he didn't do that, did he? Yeah, he continued with that lifestyle of simplicity, and he also lived according to the very precepts that he established for the Sangha. Why? Because there's meaning and purpose in those precepts. Now, okay, here's another thing, modernity versus the ancient times. There are many precepts now that become very difficult to keep literally in our society due to the way our society is structured. So does that mean that we live strictly according to the precepts, even if it entails going against some societal standards? Does it mean that we throw out the precepts and just do what society likes for monastics to do? Does it mean that maybe we think of what the meaning of those precepts were that are difficult to practice literally now, but we try and practice the meaning of the precepts in a way that corresponds to our culture to tame our mind in the way that the Buddha wanted it to be tamed. Okay? So regarding this question, there's many, many different answers. Yeah? You have some people who say, we follow the Vinaya exactly, literally, the way the Buddha set it down. Of course, even those people have some exceptions, because one of the precepts is not to ride in a vehicle, and everybody rides in vehicles. Okay, so even those people have some exceptions. But, everything is, you eat from this time to this time, and you don't eat from that time to that time, and these things are allowed to eat, and those things are not allowed to eat at which time in the day, and here is, kind of how you wear your robes, and here is, like exactly the way the Buddha structured it. Okay? As if it were, 2,600 years ago in an agrarian society. Yeah? And I have many Dharma friends who live in that way. And so, for example, the whole day is structured around the meal, because you can't eat after a certain, before a certain time and after a certain time. So everything you do in that day is structured around where and when you have the meal. Okay? And, some people don't drive. So, in some Buddhist traditions, they don't drive. And so the lay people have to drive from their home to the monastery, then take the monastic into the city to give a teaching, then drive back to the monastery, and then they go back to the city. So you have two round trips, of pollution in the world. Other monasteries decide the monastics drive, and they just go from point A to point B and back. So it's one trip of pollution in the environment. Okay? So, different people are going to make different decisions, and some people feel, completely this is the way the Buddha set it out, we don't want to change anything. And other people say, well, there's more concerns now, because we have to be concerned with polluting the environment. Yeah, we have to be concerned with recycling things. Yeah, I was, when I went on Pintapat in Thailand, everybody, I think in ancient times, they just put the food in your bowl, but nowadays they put it in a plastic bag and in the bowl. Okay, and then they get it back to the temple and spread it out, and everybody shares, or if you're, just eating by yourself. But there's an incredible use of plastic for feeding the Sangha. Because everybody has so many individual dishes, all in plastic things, that are disposed of. Yeah. And then the drinks in the afternoon are all in these cartons. And so you have incredible amount of waste, packaging waste at the monasteries. But the precepts are kept very literally according to the way the Buddha taught. Okay? For me, I felt very uncomfortable. And here, as you've noticed, we wash our plastic bags and we don't throw them away. They don't get used for one individual. Everything gets reused, We're trying now to move to a thing of where we get more bulk supplies so that there's less packaging, and we recycle everything as much as we possibly can. Yeah. So you see that in different times you want to do things differently, and different people make different decisions about these kinds of things. Okay? So I think the idea is we want to respect all the different traditions and the whole variety of ways of dealing with these things, but also to be very clear in our own mind about how we're working with those things and why we're doing them in that particular way. Yeah. In the Tibetan monasteries, they were having a big problem at a particular time with monks going to the video houses in town, because there's no precepts about video houses, and monks love kung fu movies. Tibetan monks love them, okay? And, it wasn't very nice to have all these Tibetan monks in town where they're showing, the video movies. So the abbot's way of dealing with this was to say nobody can go to town for movies. But then some monasteries, what they did is they started showing the kung fu movies at the monastery. Because they didn't want the lay people to criticize the monks being out like that. But then they saw that in the monastery. That's, I didn't agree with that, but of course, they're not going to do what I say. But, that's the way they chose to deal with the situation. Yeah. So as you look around, you'll find every group dealing with things in a very different way. Yeah. The topic of bhikshuni ordination is, one of the hottest topics about how do you deal with this thing in a modern culture where, women want equality, but you have a structure, that is different, that it goes along with a society of 2,600 years ago. Okay? And so the way the bhikshuni ordination was structured was that you have to have a sangha of bhikshus and a sangha of bhikshunis to give the ordination. So only, and there's different, there's three extant Vinaya traditions right now. The Pali tradition, the Dharmaguptaka, that's practiced in Korea, China, Vietnam, and then the Pali is in Southeast Asia a lot, in Sri Lanka, and then the Mula Sravastivada, which is in Tibet and Mongolia. So the only ones that have an extant bhikshuni lineage are the Dharmaguptaka right now. The other two, well, this is the way it was 30 years ago. The other two didn't. Okay? So then, the role of women in society has been changing, and women are saying, we want full ordination. We want to be able to practice with the same kind of strict precepts, and have the same responsibilities and the same privileges as the monks do. And this is a very difficult situation for the monks, you know. So you have in Theravada countries, they just said not possible. You know, there aren't any bhikshunis. You know, we can't give the ordination. Wait for Maitreya Buddha to come, and then he'll give bhikshuni ordination again, and that's it. What actually wound up happening, and it'll be interesting to see how things develop in Theravada, is some nuns from Sri Lanka in 1998 went to a bhikshuni ordination in Bodh Gaya. And I was there as part of the bhikshuni sangha that was giving the ordination at that time. And the ordination was given by the Chinese, okay, but they ordained these Theravada Siladasas as bhikkhunis, and then some of the Sri Lankan monks took them to Sarnath and kind of did part of the bhikshuni ordination ceremony again with them to kind of transform them from Dharmaguptaka bhikshunis to Pali bhikshunis. And then they went back to Sri Lanka. And technically speaking, you're not allowed to give, you know, to be a preceptor until you've been ordained for 12 years. But the monks gave some of these new bhikkhunis permission to be preceptors, and so they then started giving the dual ordination bhikkhuni ordination in Sri Lanka with, you know, the dual sangha of bhikshus and sangha of bhikshunis. Okay, so, you know, some things were not done exactly according to the rule book. Some monks protested. Many monks supported the change, and now the change is happening. And there's some nuns who practice in the Thai tradition who have gone there and received ordination, gone back to Thailand, but they're not accepted by the Thai law as bhikkhunis. They don't get the same privileges according to the government as the monks do. But many of the lay people respect them, but many of the monks protest and say, you know, they really aren't bhikshunis. That's, you know, if you want to be a bhikshuni and wear other robes, that's fine, but not in our tradition. You can't be one. So there's a lot of controversy there. Okay? The Tibetans, they're really stuck too. It's amazing. They used to say, well, it's hard for us to change to allow bhikkhuni ordination because the Theravadas might criticize us, saying that we keep Vinaya laxly because we practice Tantra. So, you know, we want to be strict about this and not give the bhikshuni ordination. But now the Theravadas are giving it in Sri Lanka, and the Tibetans still, there's a lot of resistance. And amongst the different Tibetan quarters, you know, some lamas are very in favor of it. Some lamas are very conservative and resistant. So it's, you know, a big thing. And it could have very far-reaching implications for the survival of Buddhism on the planet. You know, because in some cultures where gender equality is not an issue, it's not an issue for them. For cultures where gender equality is an issue, the nuns not having equal access to ordination is an important issue. Yeah, and the role of women, how women are treated in monastic establishments, is of concern to people in a society that values gender equality. It's not doesn't even reach the radar for people in a society where that's not a value. Okay, not even on their radar. They don't even get it. Yeah. So here you have Buddhism now going internationally. So what are we going to do? There's different cultures with different values. How are we going to make this happen? Yeah, you have so many women in Tibetan culture who want to ordain, and there aren't enough beds in the nunneries for them. But they can't receive bhikshuni ordination. and they don't get nearly as many offerings as the monks get. And yet the monks in the monastery, the population, they're getting worried about it because, many of the monks can now go out and get a secular education and make more money, or meet a nice woman in the West who will bring them to the West, and then they can have a nice life in America. Okay? So, you have all these monastic traditions meeting modernity, and it's a very interesting thing that's going on. Yeah? For both the communities in Asia and the communities here. Yeah? So if you're wondering, well, how is it that we're in the Tibetan tradition but we have bhikshunis at the Abbey? The answer is that, how Western Sangha is treated in the different traditions really varies according to the tradition. In the Thai tradition, in Thailand and Sri Lanka, they love the Western Sangha. Come in, you're welcomed, you are respected, you can do the same things when you have the training as the Thai bhikkhus do, giving precepts and everything like that. They're very proud, I think, of their Western Sangha. The Tibetans don't have that attitude. Yeah, the Tibetans were never colonized. Thailand wasn't either, but still it was a different situation. The Tibetans were never colonized by any of the foreign policy powers, okay? And they were a very isolated country and a very proud people, proud of their culture, of their dharma, and so on. And, so there's this kind of attitude of, it's fine if Westerners come and practice the Dharma, and you can certainly help us raise money because we are a refugee community in India. But you grew up in the West and you're never kind of really going to be the real McCoy. Yeah? And that's what's very interesting now is they just appointed one monk, American monk, as the abbot of a Tibetan monastery. His Holiness did. And it's like, whoa, it's whoa. And I mean, this monk, I know him, he's very good. He's a very good monk, but I don't envy his position, And His Holiness apparently said, I want you to bring some modernity to the monastery. Oh, good luck. If you bring money to the monastery, they love you. If you bring modernity, it's a bit iffy. Okay? Depends which aspects. Although His Holiness certainly, he wants science in the curriculum. He wants, things the education system to be updated. Okay, so anyway, most of the Westerners in the Tibetan tradition, we don't have any status in the Tibetan establishment. So I used to really feel, kind of left out and rejected and unappreciated and stuff. And now I think it was a real blessing, because what we were able to do here at the Abbey is, your Vinaya tradition and your practice tradition don't have to be the same. They can be different. Okay? In Tibet, your Vinaya tradition is Mula Sravasti, your practice tradition is, Nyingma Kargye Gelu Sakya, whatever it is. So we just decided here, because I and there are some other Western nuns who practice in the Tibetan tradition, we had gone to Taiwan, or some had gone to Vietnam or Korea to take their bhikshuni ordination there. So we're ordained in a different Vinaya tradition. So we're practicing the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya tradition here, yeah, even though our practice tradition is from the Tibetan Buddhism. And it's completely legitimate to do that. Yeah. And what it does is it enables us to have Bhikshuni ordination here, to have Bhikshunis here. People are still going to Taiwan to take the ordination. But for the Tibetan nuns, they can't do that because they're Tibetans and the monks would not look very well upon them going to Taiwan to take the ordination. And if they brought it back to the Tibetan community, it would be quite difficult for them to do all the monastic rituals and so on. So they're in a very different situation because they're part of the Tibetan community, whereas we aren't. Yeah. But I must say it's been surprising to me the last year or so to be invited to some of these international conferences on Buddhism, because they used to not invite women at all. Yeah. And then now slowly there's kind of a few people getting invited to these. By the way, the one, that I was wondering whether to go to in October or not, His Holiness can't go to it, so they're postponing it. Yeah, so maybe I'll get to go after all, we'll see. Anyway, so that's how we're organizing it here at the Abbey, because we feel that Bhikshuni ordination is really, really important. Yeah. But then the whole issue of, gender equality, even if you have Bhikshuni ordination, gender equality, how men and women relate to each other, different communities are going to do it in very different ways. If you're in Thailand, if you're a woman and you want to make an offering to a man, he puts a cloth out here. You put your offering on the cloth while his hands are here. And then when you remove your hands, then he pulls the cloth towards you. And that's to avoid there being any physical contact that might incite lust. Okay. This actually, it is not a Vinaya rule that you have to put out the cloth and all of this. That is something from ancient Cambodian culture that the Thais adopted. Yeah, in Sri Lanka, a woman can give something directly to a man. In Thailand, they can't, because they want everything to be, kind of completely not any suspicion at all of anything going on. Yeah. So that's the way they handle that. Sometimes in the Tibetan tradition, I think it's a bit too sloppy. Yeah, the way people relate, men and women relate to each other. Yeah. So, but here in the West, what we want to seek is some kind of balanced way. Yeah. So, you shake hands because that's what people do in this culture. Yeah. But you don't go around giving people of the opposite sex, or if you're gay, people of the same sex, big hugs. Because that isn't good for your practice, and that could make other people wonder what's going on in the Sangha. Okay? So, that's how we've adopted to it here. I was, regarding the whole issue of gays, it's really funny. I have one of my friends, somebody who was like, Achan, Pasano Achan, Amaro's student. He lived in New York when I was there, and so Seattle when I was there, and so he would come to the center, where I was teaching, and and I knew him quite well over the years, and then he ordained, and he was gay. He was in a long-term relationship when they broke up because he ordained. What I found incredibly interesting was when I met him at a Buddhist conference. He was very insistent that we sit outside and we sit on opposite sides of the table, and it has to be in full view of everybody, and other people have to be around. And I said, fine. I mean, I know what things are, and it's the same rules for me. But I thought he was really emphasizing it. And I'm like, I don't know, 10 years older than him or something. And I've been ordained 20 years longer, or 25 years longer. Anyway, okay. So we did that. But then while we're talking, and I say, how are you, and how are you adjusting, and things like that, then he's telling me about, his previous spouse, who was quite upset that he left to ordain. But his spouse had come down to Abhayagiri, and because they were both men, they could take walks in the woods together, they could sit in a room together alone with nobody else present and talk, and that was completely kosher. And I had to sit and go, because it just, that part didn't make sense to me. Yeah, but like I said, every group chooses their own way to do it. And they all have their reasons, and their reason for doing it that way was, this is what the Vinaya says. And we're following Vinaya exactly, correctly, and that's how we're doing it, At the Abbey, we're doing things a little bit different, yeah? And so, we let people shake hands and whatever, but hugging is a different issue, yeah? And we don't go in each other's rooms, because among the Western Sangha, there's quite a number of gay people, and so, being in each other's rooms can present challenges, so we don't do that, You stay in your own room and don't, hang out with each other in each other's rooms. Okay, so there's always these different challenges that come up according to the culture, according to the people who are there, and you have to somehow find your way through them, and people decide different things. Okay, that was not what I had planned on talking about this morning. I was going to talk about this. But anyway, maybe there's some questions or comments or, yeah.
You mentioned that, actually I can't remember, but you said that in the Sri Lanka, in the Theravada tradition, there were some who transformed the Dhammayutta into Theravada.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Is this actually really possible? So like the Tibetan nuns could do it too if they would ordain the Dhammayutta, they could transform it in a Monastic.
Well, you see, this is where everybody makes different decisions. The Theravada monks decided, yes, they could transform the Bhikshuni ordination into a Theravada ordination. The Tibetans say, no, it's not possible. Yeah? So, the Tibetans, that they have a different imperceptible form, because there's different Vinaya lineages. So according to your lineage, you get a different imperceptible form. And, and we can't have a dual ordination of Chinese nuns and Tibetan monks because they have different lineages. And you can't give the ordination in the Dharmaguptaka because they get a Dharmaguptaka imperceptible form, which cannot be converted into a Mula Sravastivada imperceptible form.
But that's what happened to the Tibetan monks, didn't we see? Because I don't know where...
Shh.
So we have the blue line here.
Shh. They were Chinese, but they were really Mula Sravastivada. They weren't Dharmaguptaka. Even though the Chinese emperor, 150, 200 years before that, had insisted that all the Chinese follow the Dharmaguptaka ordination, they were really Mula Sravastivada. I did a research paper on this. It looks like almost certain they were Dharmaguptaka. But you kinda, and even so, when they edit, when Gompa Rapsal was the monk who was ordained, by the Sangha of monks, you're not supposed to give the ordination to be the preceptor unless you've been ordained 10 years. There's one little clause that if you're an exceptional monk, and it's a dire situation, maybe 5 years will do. Gompa Rapsa wasn't even ordained 5 years, but he was acting as a preceptor. And the whole bhikshu ordination in Tibet now stems from him having ordained these people. But he hadn't been ordained long enough. There was some special circumstance, and it was okay. But for the nuns, no. Other questions? Yes?
So, will you guys be able to give ordination?
That's what we want to. We're able to give the novice and training ordinations for the women. What we want to do is have both bhikshu and bhikshuni sanghas here at the Abbey, both in the Dharmaguptaka tradition, and then we can give ordinations here in English. Yeah? So, but that's going to be a while in coming, because you need people to be ordained long enough before you can do that.
That's the point that, to clarify, is that the men who come here who are ordained are also ordaining the Dharmaguptaka, so we need a Chinese Sangha. And then when they become bhikshus, they're going to go to Taiwan also and do the ordination there. So there's not a separation of the men here who are going to do Mula Vastavada. They're going to stay and have to go through sort of the same criteria as the
Yeah.
Christians.
Does it need to be 10 of them?
What?
Does it need to be 10 bhikshus as well?
This is not a central country, so 5 is okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably I shouldn't speak right now because I'm feeling very reactive, but I'm going to eventually form an idea about this slapping thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're questioning why should they change. In my opinion, I think they should change.
Oh, that I agree with you.
You've really,
Yes.
really done a lot of work in separating out what is cultural from Tibetan
Mhm.
Buddhism and what is Buddhism. And you've never told us stories about Buddha slapping his disciples.
Mhm.
And you don't slap us. So
Oh, maybe I should. Yeah. No, I agree. I wouldn't advocate slapping. Okay? But my point was, in Asian society, I'm not Asian. I don't know how that looks.
yeah, and I think that is changing too, because when I was
Oh, yeah.
on, they were saying that people are leaving the monasteries in droves because they don't like strict discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah. Ruby, what do you think about slapping? Do you think, how would it go in Asian culture?
When I was teaching in a public school, I was very shocked because caning in public is still part of the school system.
Mm-hmm.
You bring a child out there and then there's a whole procedure and you smack him on the butt in front of the whole school. And
Mhm.
this is considered for his own good before he goes to jail and gets caned. I mean, caning is part of it.
Yeah, caning's part in jail too. They can cane you. Yeah.
So, no, it's the same idea. It's just trying to, it's partly making an example, and it's supposed to, induce shame. But I think with the younger generation, it's working the other way.
Mm.
There's a lot of anger among the kids, I think, who get caned. I mean, so they just know they won't repeat the same mistake, but there's a lot of resentment
That builds up. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a good example of how cultures are changing from one generation to the next generation. So that kind of thing may also change, as maybe, yeah. Singapore changes.
In a culture, it can't change because somebody from outside the culture thinks that it should be different.
Right, exactly. It has to change within the culture. So if the young people are having a different idea, then when they get to be, when they're no longer the young generation, when they become the old fogies, then they can change it. Yeah, because...
kids that went to college somewhere else.
So people with Singaporeans that are going to Western universities around the world,
Yeah.
they have an influence too.
Right, and many of them don't go back to live in Singapore. They stay in the West. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When I was in Tibet last summer, I was at the monastery of the Panchen Lama.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what it's called.
Teshilimpo.
And we were in a space with a huge altar, and all of a sudden it was so crowded, and all of a sudden there was this monk that was beating this old woman with like a rag, sort of, but just like chasing her and beating her. It was awful, and she was trying to get out and covering herself,
Mm-hmm.
but it was so shocking to see a monastic doing this to an old woman. And our guide told me that she was a thief. She was stealing from the monastery, but it was really shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. So you see those kinds of things that are shocking, and, it looks horrible. But then if you learn that she's a thief,
Right.
and you know about the karma of stealing from the Sangha, then his chasing her out was good. And whether he had been, if he had gone to her and said, Madame, please, do not take that silver thing from the Buddha, it doesn't belong to you, would that have worked? Yeah. So, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, in the Tibetan monasteries, they beat the kids. Yeah. I don't agree, but that's their culture, and they certainly don't want to listen to me.
And they laugh. Tensor Wanchop tells that story about being hit with those beads over and over.
Yeah.
She held it.
Yeah.
One of them. And just laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh about how good it was for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, there's quite a big difference in cultures. When I was a little kid, I said to my parents, stop, just hit me, stop yelling. Yeah? So sometimes, but they didn't hit me, they yelled, and I hated it. I thought getting hit would be so much easier. So, no, but every culture is very different. Yeah? And even within one culture. Yeah, you can come in America, and some traditions say it's fine, watch soap operas. Doesn't matter if the Sangha watches soap operas. Other people will say, don't watch soap operas. Yeah, and you'll find all people doing all different sorts of things. So I think here's where, it's so easy for our mind to get very judgmental, extremely judgmental. And I know I've fought with that a lot. And the way that I've been able to deal with it is just say, different people do things different ways, and I have to accept that, and because they all have their reasons for doing what they do, and I'll do it the way that seems best, and most accurate to me, and also nobody's going to like it. Because everybody's going to think I should do things different too. I'm too loose about one thing, I'm too rigid about another thing. Yeah, you can't please everybody. Yeah.
I have a question. I really like the structure you have here, where you come for EML, then you come for long-term residency, and you step into Anagarika, and then the reviews and biolytics. So my question is, as a practitioner and also starting on this journey, and
Yeah, I think, there are certain things. I think one thing is feeling really settled in the precepts that you have already, and feeling like, I like these precepts. I see the benefit of having the precepts. Yeah, I still have to be quite vigilant in keeping them well, but I really see the benefit of it. And having that same kind of attitude towards just the way we live here at the Abbey, I see the benefit of, the schedule and the different rules we have in the community. I may not like them all, but I see the benefit, and I'm comfortable keeping things that way and living things that way. Because when you first come, it's a whole different shift. How many people have grown up living in community? You haven't. You've grown up where you work and then you go home to your family, and work people, you may like them or not, but your family's always there for you to support you. And you come into a monastery and there's nowhere to go home to only be with the people you love. And it's a huge adjustment. Huge, because you have to really stop. You have to start releasing the attachment to your family and opening up and accepting, all the different personalities and here, and respecting all the people here as a completely different way than how you've lived before. So it's a huge process coming to live in community. Yeah, and some people, I think, don't even realize that. They think, I'll come and live, and then immediately I can just enter into the whole thing. But it takes some time to get used to. Yeah, and the whole way we do things here, when we don't go out and buy food. So if it's your day to cook and there isn't in the kitchen what you want to use to cook, you don't jump in the car and go to the store and buy it. And even, we try and plan trips to the stores so that we minimize the amount of petrol that we're expending and putting into the environment. And that's for when we buy non-food items, okay? So it takes time to really get used to all of that. It's very, very different, And it's quite natural at the beginning that people are like, I don't like this. I'm so used to, going to bed at the time I want to go to bed at, and now I have to go to bed early because I have to wake up early, and I don't like waking up early. I want to wake up late because I'm a night person. I do better at night, and they're making me wake up early. And so for some people, that's a huge problem. So for some people, they're morning people, that's no problem. Other people come here, and it's like, I can't get in the car and go somewhere. I can't have my own car, And it's like, because the car in our culture is the symbol of independence and freedom. I don't have my own car. How can I not have my own car? This isn't right. I should be able to have my own car. And when I want to go somewhere, I should be able to get in my car and go there. We had one person here, this was a huge issue for him, with the Sangha not having their own car. Okay? He didn't mind getting up early, but he minded that. Okay? The people who don't want to get up early, they don't care about the car. Then somebody else, comes in, and it's like, oh, there's so much ritual here. There's so much talking during meditation. I want to do silent meditation, and all these people are talking. Can't we do it so that, instead of having half the morning session, half in here, and then we have to get up and go over to the library, can't the people who want to do the Lamrim stay in here, and the people who want to have silence, they go to the library? After all, they want to be silent, so they can move in silence, and go somewhere else. We want to stay here. Yeah. And I don't want to do that like them. I don't want to have so much silence. I like the Lamrim. And then there's other people who come here and say, oh, there's just too much talking during the meditation time. I want silence. Get those people who want to do Lamrim out of here. I want silent time. Be alone with my distractions. Yeah? And then somebody else comes here and says, I want more time to study. And there isn't enough time to study. I have to work too much. And then there's somebody else who comes here and says, oh, I really like to work. I'm not so fond of studying. Why do I have to study so much? I really like doing the offering service part. Yeah, so we have everybody here. We have everybody here. Yeah. And so that's why I tell people when you come, nobody here likes the schedule. So as soon as you accept that and get used to that, you'll be so much happier. Yeah? We would all change the schedule, wouldn't we? Wouldn't you change it a little bit? I think, I would change all sorts of things in the schedule. But the purpose of my being here isn't to change the schedule and make the community do what I think should be done at a certain time. My purpose in being here is to train my mind. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of steps, in terms of, these kind of things, I think, it's not that somebody has to master all of this completely, but because then you're a Buddha, but to see that somebody's working on it. You want to see that somebody's really working on these kinds of issues. Yeah? And everybody who lives here, their buttons get pushed. Yeah? So we just want to look and see, is somebody really trying to work on their buttons? Or are they protecting their buttons as the most cherished property and constantly pointing fingers outward? Yeah? And, and so all of this is kind of a reflection of what people are doing in their meditation sessions too. So, it's not like we have a checklist and, we give points. Oh, they get 5 points because they're working with their mind, and this one only gets 3 points for working with their mind. This, we don't do things like that. We just want to see that people are making progress and going in that direction, and that it looks like there's some stability. We also want to make sure that people can be celibate. Celibacy is not for everybody. Yeah, so we want to make sure that people feel comfortable being celibate and can, maintain celibacy. Okay? Is your hand up or because a question? No, it's up for your bite. Okay. Oh. Anyway, it's 10:20. We need to stop now. So.